Hey everyone, it's LS, and this is going to be the patch 7.18 notes rundown. And without talking about anything else, let's just get right into it. So first up, Azir, his R base damage is increased. It's not increased though at rank 1, it begins to get increased 25 damage at rank 2, and then it gets increased quite noticeably at rank 3. I don't think that the R Emperor's Divide damage is necessarily what's holding Azir back from being picked. I know that throughout the last 9 months or so, a lot of players in customs tried to make him work, but it was really never to much success. So don't expect this change for his tier 3 to actually propel him back into professional play or make him somehow a good solo queue pick. So this change, I don't think that it's enough, and I think that either he's looking at potentially needing another rework, or something else has to be done to him that can affect him, such as itemization, or maybe changes outright to some abilities that aren't a total rework. So that's all that I have to say for Azir. Cassiopeia, E-Twin Fang, so they said that Cassiopeia's high base damage is allowing Cassio to dip into a defensive itemization. What they're talking about here right now is the popularity of the Abyssal Mask on Cassiopeia. It's enabling her to be a little bit tanky, and then obviously make a lot of use out of its passives that it grants into her. So what they've done here is they take away quite a bit of bonus damage versus poison targets. They end up reducing it by 25, but they bonus AP ratio versus poison targets is up by 0.10. So what this means is that Cassiopeia needs to get to 2 items with the Abyssal Mask in order to eventually start making use of its passive and actually dealing basically the same amount of damage that she was dealing before, which I don't think is actually too problematic, because Cassiopeia is going to go Morellonomicon, she's going to go Seraph's Embrace. Those 2 items alone are going to give her the AP that she needs in order to make use of the new Twin Fang buff. And then obviously it's going to enable her to actually scale further into the late game. So I don't think that what Riot is saying here, where if Cass wants to melt phase, she should have to literally pay for it, I don't think that's actually going to be the case. I think that the loss of damage is entirely able to be dealt with, because realistically, most situations, especially in pro play, are going to be overkill situations. I am extremely doubtful that such a thin number in mid-game teamfights specifically is going to really knock her down in any sense or dissuade her from going in for the Abyssal Mask itemization if she chooses to go for it. However, what this might end up doing is maybe making it so that she's forced to actually transform that tier even earlier, so that she gets more bang for her buck out of the Abyssal Mask as well. That's pretty much all that I think. I think that Cassiopeia is still really good for solo queue, obviously, and I do expect that we will see her at Worlds regardless, and I don't think this change will actually impact that type of itemization route that she will end up taking sometimes. Now we move on to Elise. W base damage decreased, but scaling increased, E cooldown increased at later ranks. So the Elise changes here are something that I'm finding very bizarre, in also regards to some other stuff that we're going to talk about in this patch. So the volatile Spiderling loses 5 damage at rank 1, and then it loses quite a bit more at rank 2, and then obviously you can see that it loses quite a bit at rank 5. The ratio being increased by 0.15 though, I really don't feel like Elise is going to be able to make use of this, at least not in games that matter. So she's going to constantly be on the back foot for the most part. The other thing that this is doing is it's dissuading the off-tank Elise, and it's dissuading the full-tank Elise that sometimes junglers opt in for going for. The E-Repel cooldown increase is also kind of weird. She ends up getting 4 seconds added at rank 5, and this is a little bit problematic as well, because the tank Elise ends up lacking in the CDR department, and even the AP Elise never really going to cap that CDR, I don't think. So this is a very, very noticeable change, and while late game teamfights, you're not often going to be able to get 2 repels off anyway, this is still going to be somewhat noticeable in other areas of the game during the mid to late transition. It's not going to be the end of the world, it's just something that's a little bit confusing to me anyway. But the volatile Spiderling change, I don't really like it that much. I know that Elise is still an extremely strong jungler. I know that Koreans still absolutely love her in the jungle. Do I think that these changes to her Spiderling are necessarily going to kill her? No. I think that she'll still be picked, and again, you know, she still has her utility elsewhere. I think the changes to the mid-game for Elise, it doesn't really start to get felt anyway until the late game, so The E-Repel changes, they're not going to affect her too much. Still probably not the best jungler to pick in solo queue, outside of Korean solo queue, but yeah, I think that she's in a pretty good spot, and as long as nothing else happens to her pre-Worlds for some reason, then we'll probably end up seeing her come out at Worlds, so I think that's good. Fiora, this is a change that is really interesting, because Fiora's basically been on a roller coaster for the past 8 months or something, where she's been buffed, nerfed, but, and she, had a lot of people complain about her. She's been picked quite often, and then she has phases where she goes unpicked, and I think she fits really good right now as the anti-tank. And I think that a lot of people's problems with her actually stemmed from just the fact that she has a really strong laning phase in some matchups, and her scaling is virtually unmatched in the game, and that felt really wrong to some people, in addition to some of the itemization that existed. So basically the passive duelist stance is now back up. It's at 50% now. It used to be 45%, but it'll be noticeable right here at the 20 and 30%. The R Grand Challenge, Fiora once again gains duelist stance movement speed bonus while in Grand Challenge circle. So these Fiora buffs are interesting. I do think that she will see play at Worlds. I think that she's still a phenomenal champion. And I don't think that any of the changes that ever hit her really hit her for people that were extremely competent at her. And so I'm excited to hopefully see Fiora show up in Worlds games. And I'm just still like scratching my head a little bit though as to why they haven't tried to take another approach with her rather than just go through this ebb and flow with her patch notes and whatnot. So okay, Gnar. Gnar's base health decreased. This is a little bit interesting. So Gnar now loses 30 HP, which I guess that's not super noticeable. It's probably going to be a little bit under one auto attack. So it's not the end of the world, but it's sort of just like why, what's going on with that? That doesn't really make too much sense. And they say, well, we're glad he's pushing tanks when they can't get to him. We want to give him opponent a better chance to go for the kill when they do capitalize on his positioning mistakes. This change to him doesn't make that much sense. I feel like this can definitely be played around, and because it's so small for Gnar specifically, if this was another champion, I feel like it would be a little bit different. But I think that because of Gnar's range, how he can choose to play the lane, the way that he itemizes, and usually the matchups that he's picked into and whatnot, I don't feel like this impacts him as much as some other champions that have had base health get nerfed in the past, and it actually really affects their laning phase, and because of the matchups that they're likely picked into, or how their matchups already work currently, and yada yada yada. In solo queue, I still don't think Gnar is that great. This will obviously affect him inside of solo queue, because level 1, 2, 3 all-ins or whatnot. This is definitely going to help the player that's against the Gnar. But in competitive, I don't think that it's a sizable enough change to really impact him drastically. So that's pretty okay for Gnar. Gragas base armor decreased, E collision detection decreased. Now this is something I know that a lot of people complained about, the Gragas E, but the base armor decrease is a little bit random to me. He loses 3 armor, which it's not entirely the end of the world. You can obviously use runes against it, but obviously you'll suffer losses elsewhere. The E body slam detection radius 210 to 180, and then the hitbox offset to 60 to 40. Indicator change to more accurately reflect hitbox. So Gragas has been through these changes constantly, where originally he was a top laner, and then they hit his damage to minions that took him out of the top lane. And then he went into the jungle, and then a lot of people were still unsure about him, and then a lot of people liked him in the jungle. Then he got brought back to the top lane as a jungler as well, and then he primarily stayed as a jungler as he faded out of the top lane. And I feel like with the meta having a lot of jungle champs already, you have Sejuani, you have Nidalee, Leeson, you have Elise, you have Maokai, you have so many different champions. I don't like when one of them, which is picked infrequently, and realistically, I mean, this is the reason that he's picked for the most part, right, is his body slam, and then you know, his sustain inside of the jungle, yada, yada, yada. I feel like hitting him like this is really weird, although I guess it's somewhat justified in a sense via all the complaints anyway, but I would have liked to have seen Gragas hit in some other way, because I feel like the body slam is his core identity, and changing that in any way definitely impacts him very negatively. Obviously, Gragases are going to feel this. Is it enough to take him out of competitive or solo queue? Probably hurts him in solo queue much more than competitive. He can have some other synergistic uses inside of team comps, matchup dynamics, yada, yada, yada. I don't think it's the end of the world, because then you have to ask yourself, how much did that collision radius change really affect this gank or that gank or this gank or that gank? So while it will affect some in the grand, you know, the big picture, it's not going to affect all of them. And then the armor change, I don't think this impacts him enough either. So I think Gragas is probably still going to be fine. It's just another weird change to me, sort of like the Elise change. But yeah. Ivern, E-Explosion, base damage, and ratio increase. Now, this is really interesting because Ivern is a champion that I've actually been talking about for about the last 2 months or 2.5 months, in the sense that I think he's forgotten. And the reason that I say that he's forgotten is, yes, he's the king of bad, or he's the king of terror bad. The way that the itemizations changed, I felt like was actually beneficial for him in a way. The Athenes changed, the redemption, you know, because he was able to itemize into his stuff differently. He no longer got the sustain that he used to get from just rushing Athenes or whatnot. But with the Ardent Sensor, the Athenes, the Solari, all that good jazz, I felt like Ivern just was completely forgotten about. I think the way that the meta is right now, he's situationally a good pick in very, very, very specific team comps. I think that the buff to his trigger seed is really interesting, because right now, you know, the way that he itemizes, he's going to make a lot of use out of this, because he can end up getting, I think, up to about 240 AP. So, you know, getting an extra flat 10 base and then getting that 0.10 ability power, it's really going to help for his shields, and that's basically, you know, why you pick him in addition to Daisy. The brush changes that he suffered a few patches back, it doesn't really matter. You very rarely place the brushes at max range. Generally, you place them almost at a point where you're going to run into them, so that you can get his passive from them, so that he can throw down his auto attacks and whatnot, and usually that's never placing them at max range. Obviously, the gimmick of the brushes on top of the neutral monsters, that didn't actually affect... I mean, it affects him, but it doesn't dramatically affect him. So I really like this for Ivern. Obviously, it's super fantastic for solo queue. In competitive, I feel like if we see him at Worlds, it'll be from a Western team. I don't think that he will be picked by Koreans or Chinese, although I'm a little bit ignorant on, you know, how the Chinese meta was throughout spring and summer. So I could be completely wrong there. But I feel like he could be used as a surprise pick from maybe some team in the West, because I know that Ivern was extremely popular in the West at a certain point. I believe especially in Europe, but I think that Korea will stick to their guns of, you know, Elise, Nidalee, Rek'Sai, Gragas, you know, whatever else, and of course they'll use other junglers as well, like Sejuani, and, you know, the more common picks as well. So that's what I expect. Solo queue, Ivern, I think if you haven't been playing him or you forgot about him, you can definitely pick him up again. He's still the king of terror bad. This is going to help him that much more. Just make sure that you're itemizing properly. Okay, so Jarvan, W base shield and shield per enemy champion decreased. And again, this all ties in. So we've had Nidalee, or we've had Elise hit, we've had Gragas hit, we've had Jarvan hit. 2 of those are Cinderhulk junglers, although obviously, you know, you can have some really weird stuff where Jarvan goes, or not Jarvan, Gragas goes the blue smite, or the what is it, runic echo, and then, you know, you can have Jarvan go warrior, and obviously Elise can go tank, even though she still will often pick up the runic echo. So a lot of changes to some of these junglers, and I mean Ivern in here as well, so lots of junglers getting touched on. W Golden Aegis, base shield, he ends up losing only 5. That's not the end of the world. Bonus shield per enemy champion, or per champion, 4% to 3%. This is the really big change. Jarvan's max health. This is gigantic. I don't know exactly why they did it. It's not going to prevent Jarvan from being picked. It's not going to impact him in solo queue. But again, it is something that just tones him back a little bit. And I guess in that sense, some people might like it. Personally, I'm obviously an advocate of longer things. Well, that sounded weird, but I enjoy extended trades, longer duration games and, whatever. And so I don't... That sounds weird, right? Because then that sounds like what I'm talking about with some of these other champions is weird. But basically, the Jarvan changes don't do enough. But again, it's another change that it leaves me wondering why. That's basically the immediate thought that comes into my head is why. One of the places, though, that this will certainly be felt, probably, is in top lane and in mid lane. You'll be able to feel this a lot more there, where your shield will probably get eaten through. And so in that sense, you can definitely feel it up there or in there at mid. Yeah. All right, so moving on to Kalista. This is a champion that has been coming back a lot recently. She has been fantastic. She is up there with Twitch and Kog'Maw. Extremely popular on Korea. Don't know how she is on NA and EU right now. Haven't been really checking the solo queue of those regions. I don't know exactly how she's doing in China. I don't think there is even an OPGG for that. Maybe there is. But anyways, our cooldown increased. So 120 to 60 scaling to 150 to 90 scaling. So I'm going to go out there and say that this one will basically have no impact. I feel like this one will really not do anything. I feel like the only one that might be noticeable is going to be the tier 2 ulti, the 90 to 120. And the reason that I say that is because the mid game is a point where objectives can get contested heavily and one after another very quickly. You can take a dragon team fight ends up happening, everyone dies, and then you get up, you push out 2 waves or something, you run to the Rift Herald, or you run to a Baron, and that's where this 30-second increase can really be felt. I don't think it'll be felt at the late game, even when everyone's level 18 or something, because the death timers are so dramatic, and the stalemates that are likely to occur where both teams just sort of, dance back and forth, I probably feel like that's going to end up equaling the added duration. Obviously, there's going to be some games where someone will feel it, where their ultimate's 10 seconds off or something, and they don't get to use it. But, that's going to be the same for any change, some changes, maybe Ivern's going to kill someone by 8 damage, and, he didn't do that before, something like that. But anyways, the change doesn't impact her, I don't think, again, outside of the mid-game. And I feel like that's where Kalista is the most obnoxious, and so in that sense, I think that it's really good. Okay, Leeson. W shield increased at early ranks, decreased at rank 5. So this is really interesting. So Elise gets hit, Gragas gets hit, Jarvan gets hit, although Jarvan is a multi-lane champion, so it's not like he's only a jungler. Ivern gets buffed, Leeson gets buffed. So the shield late game is negligible. Okay, that's not a nerf. That is called a tick of health regeneration. Probably even less. Depending on how he's yeah. But anyways, getting that much extra shield early on is really weird to me. He's getting 15 extra shield at rank 1. This is the weirdest thing in the world. Because if you get safeguard off multiple times, that's quite obnoxious, and I really don't understand this change. Obviously, Korean junglers are going to love this. There are going to be some Western junglers that definitely love this as well, and so I'm excited for Leeson's buff at Worlds, but it's a buff that sort of, again, makes me wonder, like, what's going on with that. It's sort of like a Fiora buff, in a sense, where it's just, you kind of can't figure out exactly what you want to do with him. With no hard card control in the early game, we want to make sure at least he brings the best in-class 2v2 dueling power. This is definitely going to help with that, and so this is going to strengthen Leeson's early game, but then, the question ends up becoming, is that too much of an early game strength? And, I mean, we'll have to see. I definitely think that he'll show his face at Worlds, and I think obviously this is fantastic for solo queue. This is definitely a really nice buff that Leeson definitely likes. So it's pretty good by Riot. But even if I think that it's like why, or like it's out there, because it's not something. If you ask me, coming into patch 7.18 rundown notes, do you think that Leeson will get a buff? I would say no. And yeah. So anyways, Lucian, E cooldown increased at early ranks, so 18 to 22. And then obviously at max, it's still the same exact thing. Now the question becomes, again, do I think that this cooldown increase is enough to impact Lucian? And to which I say basically the same thing as Callista, where Lucian's obnoxiousness comes in the mid-game, and he will definitely feel it in the mid-game. But I think in early laning phase, he won't feel it too much, because the opponent, is obviously playing around EQ or EWQ, whatever, or W, auto, E, yada, yada, yada. And so I don't think he feels it until the mid game, and so I think that that's fine. Lucian's primarily a mid laner right now anyway. Doesn't really matter. I think it's fine. I think it's completely fine. I don't think it'll affect him outside of mid game. Okay, Nautilus. This is a champion I've talked about, I think even in some of the rundowns where I asked where was he. So this is an interesting little buff. Q drive line, 60 to 100 mana scaling to 60 mana at all ranks. Hitting terrain also refunds half of Dredgeline's mana cost. So this one is, it feels like it's a buff to jungle. However, don't forget that obviously you can hook city your way back to lane in top. So you can look at it that way. I guess hook city your way back to lane in bottom. Nautilus is an interesting champion that you can look at the meta and you can say that some champions exist right now that definitely hurt him. But when you look at some of the other champions that have popped up in pro play, you probably wonder why was Nautilus gone, or why did Nautilus end up disappearing? Into that, I mean, I don't entirely, I know back then, but I feel like he's a champion that could definitely show up and surprise some people. For solo queue, however, do not pick him. There's a lot of other champions that you can pick that, it's not going to have so much team reliance or so much of a need to coordinate and work together and whatnot. So I think for solo queue, the buffs are really, really nice, but I don't think that he's worth it right now. But in competitive, perhaps he'll end up popping his head up. Okay, moving on to Nidalee, and this is another buff that is completely out of left field for me. E-heal ratio increased. So minimum ratio 0.25 or 0.275 ability power to 0.325, and then maximum ratio 0.55 ability power to 0.65 ability power. So this is super weird. We're strengthening her heal as she scales into the late game to even the playing field. So, to my knowledge, the popular Nidalee build that has been popping up on Korea has been the support Nidalee type build. And obviously, this change exactly plays into that. So, there is a lot of happy junglers that is going to really like this change. And so, again, if you asked me, is Leeson and Nidalee going to get buffs in patch 7.18, I would have told you no way. They're not going to touch those champs right before Worlds, but they did. And I think it's awesome that Nidalee gets changed, because I think that she's a super exciting jungler. I think that she allows for a lot of creativity, and I think that she really lets people put on a show if they're exceptionally good at her. So I think this is great. I really do like that, she's getting buffed, as she's one of the junglers that stands out from the tank junglers that are extremely popular. And I think that, players from all around the world are definitely going to potentially have a field day with her if they can make usage of her new build and tying that into team compositions or figuring ways to fit her in. So that's all really good. Obviously, for solo queue, you can't heal a teammate if they're dead, you know what I'm saying? But no, this is good for solo queue and competitive. It's just really surprising from Riot, so it's nice. Warren, so personally, okay, this champion's terrible. All right, and I say that with I say that after having played about 150 games of him over the course of about 6 days or something. He feels terrible in jungle, in support, in top. It's just, he feels bad. And the reason that he feels so bad is because, one, he doesn't have a go button. 2, competent players are never getting hit by the QE combo. It's just never going to happen. His R has a self-lockout in a sense, where you have to wait for the ram. You can't press W or something to lock yourself out. I guess you can press Q, but you have to wait for the ram to do the R, and you have to cast it from really long range, which I guess sort of furthermore ties in with support than it does top or jungle. But yeah, the passive, Living Forge, is sort of funny for a name because it should be Living Graveyard because of the amount of times that I'd want to kill myself when teammates go first item Masterwork. But anyways, aside from that, level 13 is not going to stop them, so don't think that it will. This should have honestly probably been like 16 or 17. Honest to God, Living Forge should have been 16 or 17, so that it could dissuade people from even doing it like second or third item. And the reason that I say that is because the stats aren't good enough. The stats would be better spent elsewhere into a component of a core item so that you can make use of that item's passive, and so that you can get more bang for your buck in that sense, and so that there's constantly a ramp that's going on. This is essentially like buying a super potion that is just permanently on, and that's just the worst feeling in the world. Sets your team back, doesn't make any sense why people do it. And it really makes you question if people are actually fully reading the items or taking into account what exactly the items give. But anyways, going back to why he feels so weird, 335 base MS is really slow in the jungle. He can go Hunter's Potion, and he can try to sustain and whatnot. If he RNGs and Water Dragon or an Ocean Drake or something, and he gets it for his team early on, it's fantastic. Then you'll never really recall. But outside of that, the Hunter's Potion it feels really gimmicky. At least if you're jungling properly, because your HP values are going to be low enough to the point where you do just have to go back. It's just not worth it to stay out on the map praying that you can get some of the honey fruit potions or whatever. So in that sense, his passive is actually taken away because he has to recall. You need to get control wards anyway. You can't buy those while you're out on the map. The best thing about his little jungle route thingy-majig is that, you know, you can clear a lot of camps, and you can upgrade to, you know, blue smite, green smite, or red smite, and then you can go for a gank. Usually, you know, you go blue smite, you run into a lane, chilling smite, and they're like, what is going on? He doesn't really take much damage in the jungle, but the problem is everything's so telegraphed. His E is clunky compared to like Scion, or not Scions, Galio's. It's like you want it to be like Galio's, but it just isn't. He's so predictable, and his passive is beneficial such a small percentage of the time. Do you actually look at it and be like, wow, that feels great, or like, wow, I got this insane edge over this? Top laners, if they're good enough, they're able to play around it. They're able to, you know, generate their own recall timings and just play around it with teleport to the point where you're left wondering, like, why don't I just TP2? You know, I'm out of corrupting potion stacks. My regeneration isn't actually strong enough. You know, and down there in bottom lane, that's the lane where you can actually feel it, because you can manage to stay in lane and you can get Targon. You know, you can get the Targon upgrade really quickly at 500 gold, and then you can continue to stay there with your ADC, and you can keep stacking. And in some cases, you can even, you know, you can craft boots, you can get Sightstone, you can get deep wards much earlier than some of the other supports. And so it feels like to me, Ornn's kit is more designed for a support than it is a top or a jungler. And I know that I'm talking a little bit more so about the champion than about the changes that he just received. Some of the changes, though, it feels like they've been out. So we'll talk about them. First one is Zhonya's Paradox. 3,900 gold, 1,000 gold upgrade. It gives plus 30 ability power, and it gives armor plus 15. It's just not worth it, okay? And like, it feels to me anyway that a mid laner, there's almost no universe where a mid does not just get Rabadon's Death Cap as the upgrade. Okay, they're not looking late game and being like, man, I really need that 15 armor. It's not happening. This doesn't make any sense. Call of the Forge God, 1050 to 1200, so you're even more locked out. So I said before that maybe you can cast Q. You might not be able to cast Q now. So you definitely can't cast W, and that's sort of a little bit weird, but it's whatever. The speed, though, is kind of nice. Obviously, it allows for less reaction time from the opponents if they're trying to get out of the way of it initially, and so you can definitely feel it there. But yeah. So, oh yeah, mid-patch 7.17 balance update. These were all okay, but it didn't feel good enough. This change, it's laughable. This was the biggest one. This was the best change. The length from 500 to 550. All right, you can add half an inch. But anyways, the W self-slow 65% to 50%, and then the, flaring out at the very end. That was the absolute best change. Noticed it a lot in top lane. Noticed it less so in bottom lane because, if you're versus double range support or something. And that's the other thing as well, is that Ornn has a lot of bad matchups down in bottom. And it becomes more so about managing to get him out of the laning phase or getting him in a lane that isn't absolutely atrocious. But you can definitely feel his W Bellow's breath. The E-searing charge is something I was even actually ignorant to while I was playing him until people started to tell me. Like, I was wondering, why are people taking Courage of the Colossus? And apparently you could just E through and get Courage. And I'm like, oh, well, that's insane for trading. But, taking that away from him forces him into Bond of Stone or Grasp of the Undying. Although I guess in some situations as support, you can actually take Courage of the Colossus. But that's going to be less common. R, called Forge God. And again, this is basically the same thing I talked about with Callista. You're not going to notice it. These things are not going to be noticed. His ultimate is not something that you're like, oh man, I have to fight now. We have to do this right now. 10 seconds off at the end, it's irrelevant. 15 seconds off in the mid game, again, it's irrelevant because he is not some champion that you press go. And there are very few champions like that in the league, so it's not like changes like this are going to be dramatic. Is it nice that it's a buff? Sure. Does Ornn have a million other problems going on for him? Absolutely. It is hilarious to me that somehow this master smith can't craft himself an actual fucking kit. But, you see what happened to his parents, and if you haven't, check the blue team fountain to the left, that animal and woman. Yeah, those are his parents. Anyways, for Con, W dash speed decreased late game, R radius decreased, and cooldown decreased late game. Rakan has too much reliability in his engage pattern. I agree with that. I think this champion's really good. W Grand Entrance, 1800 plus 100% movement speed to 250 plus 30% movement speed. So basically, late game, Rakan ends up losing around tier 2 boots, which you'll definitely be able to feel that. So that is a change that Grand Entrance nerf will be felt with. R, the quickness, 200 150, cooldown 120 to 100, scaling to 120 to 80. This one is weird. It's not the end, like the 50 missing here, it's not the end of the world. And the change here is, again, it just ties in with the other stuff that I ended up talking about. A champion popped into my head that's sort of like a go button, at least in competitive, is Shen's ultimate. Or like Karthus in some cases. That's where the microseconds can actually matter. But anyways, Rakan, I think that this change here is completely fair. People are going to notice it. I do not think that it will prevent him from being picked in pro play whatsoever. So that's nice, or at least that's nice in that regard. Rengar, base armor increase. That's great. That's not what's making him not get picked that much. So anyways, base armor goes from 22 to 25, gives him a little bit more sustain. Obviously, some top Rengar players will notice this quite a lot as well, from any trades that they take and, minion damage, whatever. But I don't think that it's enough to propel him back into the meta. Rise W ratio increase, W Rune Pizen, 0.2 ability power to 0.6 ability power. So this is a change as well that I wasn't expecting, or at least not alone. I was expecting some other stuff to happen to Rise actually before Worlds, hopefully. But this is a little bit weird. So Rise went from basically being a monster in spring, at least for a while, to disappearing completely. And I don't feel like he's a champion that needed to disappear completely. Still think he's a champion that can be picked extremely situationally. The problem is, though, is that the meta isn't fantastic for him, and so if he is going to show his head, it'll be like very thin spots, in my opinion, unless it's a player that's extremely adept at Rise and they feel like the opponents are not expecting it. And then, maybe that'll be the driving force in other people trying to pick up Rise again. Obviously, for solo queue, this is really good. Tristana, E-bomb ratio reduced. Tristana is one of the other extremely popular ADCs. Bomb ratio ends up losing 0.20 bonus attack damage, and then stack ratio. Okay, that's very noticeable. So Tristana having her bomb thing reduced, I guess it's okay. The thing though that I'm wondering is that we're basically at the end here. We have one more champion to go, and I don't see anything on COG and Twitch, and I'm really surprised nothing was done to Ezreal, because he's now being played in a role that he's not intended to be in, and let me tell you, he's genuinely very scary from that role. He's quite a force to be reckoned with. If you thought that trying to escape from a Storm Raider's Graves was scary, you haven't seen anything yet if you haven't faced a red smite jungle Ezreal. His clear speed is nuts. His sustain is nuts. His aggressiveness, his mobility and his pressure might be the highest in the game. And so I'm very surprised he's not on this list. Because he definitely ties in to the meta right now in some regards, and he benefits from, obviously, Ardent if they end up picking that, you know, if they have an Ardent support versus a melee engage support or something. But anyways, I think that Tristana's bomb ratio reduction is really kind of strange if other ADCs aren't really being targeted. We can't really call Kalista what she received a target, and so it's weird to me. Yeah, I don't really have too much to say on it, other than talking about how it interacts with other champions in the meta. A bit of subtle reinforcement for when Rumble's about to enter the danger zone, so this is nice, but it's not really a change. It's just it helps people manage it a little bit better. Okay, now going into enchantment Cinderhulk. So Cinderhulk got hit, and with the buffs to Nidalee and Leeson, as well as the popularity of jungle Ezreal right now, this is definitely going to be liked by all of them. 25 HP being lost from it, something that you'll notice. It's not the end of the world, but it's something that you'll notice. Okay, Spell Thief's Edgeline, and this is a item that fell out of popularity. Obviously, everyone's liking the coin, or they're liking the Targon on the engage support. I do think that mage supports could end up being a surprise, and obviously the Frostfang will, be welcomed by them. So the cooldown being on the tier 2 one is noticeable, but the question that you'll end up having to ask is, if this champion can run the Spell Thief line, would they rather just run coin? And that's something that you'll have to get into for team comps and whatnot. I think for solo queue, this will be where the biggest change is felt, is that cooldown, because in lane, obviously, you're spamming your abilities as much as possible. Trying to deal damage or something if you're going Spell Thief so that you can get that gold. I think it'll really be felt there. Last hit penalty got increased, but that doesn't really matter that much anyway. And yeah. Gargoyle Stone Plate change is nice. It's interesting. Not too much really to say about it, because obviously everyone knows how Gargoyle is right now. With some of the changes to some of the other champions, I don't feel like, it's anything that's going to impact Gargoyle. It's not like, the champions that like Gargoyle are being taken out or taken away or anything. Champions are still going to build it when it's correct and when the time comes and whatnot. So, okay. Knight's Vow. Cost decreased, health decreased. This one is really weird for me, mostly because, it gets cheaper, and some people might look at that like, oh, okay, great, it's cheaper. Losing 100 HP feels kind of bad. When you're getting towards the end game or something, Knight's Vow is generally a later item for engaged supports. And when I say later item, I mean they have to get their Sightstone. They get their Solari, they get, either the upgraded Sightstone or the upgraded path, Ruby or the upgraded path, and then they end up going into Knight's Vow. This will be felt on junglers or top laners that were getting Knight's Vow for their ADC or for their mid laner, something later on into the game. Missing that 100 HP is definitely going to be noticeable. If you're missing the 100 HP and you were a Cinderhulk jungler, you'll also notice the loss there even more. And so that's a little bit feels bad, man, for Knight's Vow, but I don't think it's gonna drastically change anything for the item. Okay, so it looks like that is it for the champs and the itemization. Now, they said right here, welcome to a new patch team, Worlds is coming up, so none of these changes are particularly aggressive, but we want to make sure that the dominant outliers get tapped a bit, and some popular picks who have fallen out of the favor see some love. So is this the Worlds patch? Because I thought this was the Worlds patch, but it might not be. I'm not 100% sure. I thought 7.18 was it, but maybe it's 7.19. I'm not sure. That's okay though. I'll find out probably after posting this video. But I think that some of the changes are really cool. Like I said, the Ivern change, the Leeson change, the Nidalee, Ornn's still terrible. Lucian change I don't think affects him. Nautilus change is nice, but you know, it's all just a matter of do people want to pick him again. Fiora change leaves me scratching my head. The Elise change obviously is, you know, dissuading her from one path. Cassiopeia change I don't think will do what they intended, but I might be wrong there. Emperor's Divide, the only thing that's going to divide is teammates and champion select, so that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed the patch rundown, and that is it. Go and play jungle Ezreal, or go and get your free low with Ivern the Terrabad.